Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of stories as per usual. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. I kind of want to do something fun for this video. Let's see if we can reach 1,000 likes. I remember it was probably a few years ago now. I asked for it was something outrageous, like 6,000 likes on a video or something like that. And we actually hit it, so I kind of want to see if we can do something like that again. But just 1,000 this time around. Not too long ago, I asked for 10 trillion likes on a video. I think we could possibly pull that one off too. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated. Drop a comment letting me know what your favorite story was. Ways for me to improve my content. You know what the comment section is for. I do read all of them. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. It was the fall of 2016, my first semester of college, and my first time living away from home. Me and my best friend Tommy moved into a dorm room on campus together, and life was great. We stayed up way too late every night eating microwavable food, playing video games, and partying with the other students on our floor. Halloween landed on a Monday that year, but that didn't stop us from throwing a wild rager. It wasn't a typical party. Everyone on the floor was in on it. Some people even decorated their rooms to be all spooky. You couldn't walk 5 feet without running into a cooler full of beers or a bottle of gin. Parties like this were not allowed, but we knew we could get away with it on Halloween. I remember walking down the hallway with Tommy, going in and out of all our friends' rooms. One room had Monster Mash blasting while they were playing drinking games. Another was lit with a black light as they attempted to hotbox the room with vape clouds. Whenever we had enough of one room, we just hopped over to the next one. It was like the college kids' version of trick-or-treating. After a few games of beer pong and way too many shots, I ended up crashing on somebody's beanbag. I don't know whose room I was in, but they had a cheesy horror movie playing on the TV, and I got sucked into it. Eventually, I snapped back to reality when someone kicked the beanbag. There you are. It was Sydney, the girl I sat next to in photography. She lived a few levels up, and I invited her to the party earlier in the day. Though nothing had been said out loud yet, it was obvious that she had a thing for me. To be honest, I liked her too. I'll never forget how she looked that night. Dirty blonde hair tied back in a ponytail, black framed glasses, a t-shirt with a purple witch riding a broomstick, and a light gray denim jacket unbuttoned. You showed up. I was still laying down, bent backwards and looking at her upside down. How drunk are you right now? She crossed her arms and glared at me with mock disapproval. I just grinned ear to ear and chuckled. She helped me to my feet, and I was hit with an intense wave of dizziness. After a few minutes of regaining control of my body, we joined back up with Tommy and everyone else for more games. No more drinking for me, though. I was too far gone already. People were constantly coming in and out of our room, and I started to notice a trend in their conversations. They were all talking about room 1113. Dorm room 1113 belonged to a guy named Levi. He didn't have a roommate. It was just him in there, and I never found out why. He was a weird one, the kind of guy to randomly derail a conversation into something completely unrelated and sometimes really dark. None of us were very close with him, but it wasn't like we hated him or anything either. I will admit, though, if I knew he was going to be somewhere, I would make a point to avoid that place. Levi was hosting some sort of haunted house in his room that night. I just laughed and said, "Screw that," when Sydney said we should go check it out. She looked up at me with a sad expression on her face. "But I love haunted houses. You're not too scared, are you?" she said with a sarcastic smirk. Of Levi Crawford? Yeah, I'm terrified. She laughed and we continued our game, but we kept hearing passing conversations about the crazy stuff that was going down in Levi's room. I decided to ask Tommy if he knew anything about it. He told us that Levi was charging $5 for a trip into his haunted closet. Haunted closet? Are you for real? $5 to go stand in a rectangle? I thought he had to be joking. I haven't gone down to see it yet, but Chase was saying it's crazy, man. Like, I guess there's a whole other room connected or something. Tommy replied. This piqued Sydney's interest. A secret room in his closet? Nate, we have to go see it. The closet in room 1113 was the last place on Earth I wanted to be, but Sydney was so excited. How could I say no? I pulled out my wallet to make sure I had a 5. I did. She lit up with joy and I rolled my eyes. Okay, let's go see this creepy closet. Tommy, if I'm not back in 20 minutes, you better call the police. He laughed and agreed. We walked down the hallway and found a line of 5 people waiting outside the door that read 1113. I asked them if they had been through yet, but none of them had. They all had stories from their friends, though. Each story was different and completely unbelievable. I just chalked it all up to inebriated exaggeration. There's no way Levi Crawford was pulling off these Hollywood-level effects in his little homemade haunted house. Sydney interlocked her fingers with mine as we listened, and gave my hand a squeeze. My heart leapt a bit. This was the first time we had ever held hands. I squeezed back, and all feelings of regret disappeared. I remember thinking, hey, I guess this $5 isn't for nothing after all. The door opened and a lanky dude with an afro came out. He didn't say a word, but he was visibly shaking and his eyes were wide. Then he just slowly walked out the front door of the building. I don't know what he saw in there, but it must have been pretty bad. The 2 girls at the front of the line exchanged nervous glances with each other and then walked into the room, closing the door behind them. They were inside for about 10 minutes before the door opened again. They came stumbling out into the hallway. One was crying and the other had her arm around her friend, trying to console her. We were all concerned and asked what happened. I don't know, replied the girl who wasn't crying. She got really scared by something, but I never saw it. She won't speak, and I don't know what to do. The next 3 people in front of us went in one at a time. The first was gone for 10 minutes too, but he came out fine. He actually laughed when he saw us. Pretty freaky stuff in there. He chuckled and pointed his thumb back at the door behind him. Then it was Kate's turn, one of Tommy's many ex-girlfriends. She was gone for less than 5 minutes before the door swung open, unleashing an outburst of rage. What is wrong with you, Crawford? She looked mad. How could you do something like that? Freak? Levi peered around the corner. It's not real, Kate. I'm sorry. But she was already storming away. What happened? I asked Levi. Sometimes things just seem too realistic. That's all. It's nothing to worry about. He gave a smile that was probably meant to reassure us, but it wasn't convincing. Nervously trying to move things along, he shifted his attention to the next in line. Colin, you're up next, buddy. Got the money? Actually, I just realized that I didn't bring my wallet. An obvious lie. Sorry, Crawford. He scurried away from the door, and then it was just me and Sydney. Levi shifted his gaze to us. Guess that means it's our turn, Sydney said, bouncing up and down with nervous excitement. I wanted to follow in Colin's footsteps, but she grabbed my arms and led me into Levi's room. Once the door was closed behind me, I found myself trapped in an atmosphere of the pungent aroma of old takeout food and sweat. A wad of cash was sitting on his bed surrounded by pizza boxes. He added my $5 bill to the pile and ushered us to the closet. I opened the door to reveal a super regular looking closet. There were some coats hanging up, shoes on the ground, and no Halloween decorations. What do we do? I asked. Step inside and see what happens, Levi replied. I looked at Sydney, and she stared back with a puzzled expression. I think she was finally having regrets, but it was too late to back out. We stepped inside the musty closet, and Levi shut the door, engulfing us in darkness. We stood in silence for half a minute, and I let out a sigh. Is this some sort of joke, Levi? No response from the other side of the door. Maybe it's a puzzle, like an escape room. Sydney said optimistically. I don't see how that could be possible. Tommy said there was a secret room, remember? Tommy likes to talk out of his butt. He hasn't even been in here. I couldn't see a thing, but I could hear and feel Sydney fumbling around in the dark. She shuffled to the back of the closet, blindly patting the wall. Then she let out a gasp. There's a door. Suddenly, light poured into the closet. There was actually another room connected to Levi's. It looked just like a typical dorm room with the same colored walls, carpet, and light fixtures. But it was completely unfurnished. There was nothing in the room at all. This is so weird. Whose room is this anyway? Sydney asked. I don't know. I guess nobody's using it this semester. Why are the closets connected? That seems like a privacy issue. Maybe that's why it isn't being used. As we paced around the empty room, I was expecting a jump scare or something, but nothing happened. I realized that I couldn't hear the music playing from the hallway anymore, which was odd. I made my way to the front door and placed my fingers on the handle and hesitated. It hit me that this was the obvious path to take. Certainly Levi had something set up on the other side of the door to scare anybody who opened it. I lowered my hand and looked through the peephole first. Complete darkness. He taped over the peephole. What do you think Crawford put on the other side of this thing, Sid? I turned around and noticed that she was staring out the window. She didn't seem to hear me. Her full attention was fixed on something outside. I went over to her. Hey, you all right? Then I saw what she was looking at. Out in the field, something was staring back at us. It was dark and the shape was hard to make out, but I could tell it was tall. Its eyes were glowing white and its head looked deformed. We kept on staring at it, expecting it to move or something, but it didn't. That's a pretty good prop. I wonder how he made that thing. Where the hell are we, Nate? Her voice said shaky. What do you mean? This isn't our campus. My blood went cold. She was right. Why didn't I notice? This window should be facing the courtyard outside, and the other buildings should be visible. All we could see was an open field. I think I'm too drunk for this, Sid. Let's go back. She nodded but kept her eyes glued to the figure outside. I grabbed her hand this time and she jumped a little, but it broke her trance and she finally looked at me. Her eyes were filled with genuine fear, and it was so quiet I could have sworn I could hear her heart racing. Or maybe it was mine. We made our way back into the closet and began rummaging our way through Levi's things. My hand brushed up and down the smooth, textureless wall at the back of the closet and my stomach dropped. I became frantic, feeling all over the wall that should have been a door. The handle was gone. I dropped to the floor, searching for the gap that should have been there, but my hand slid straight to the carpet. What is it? She asked, but she already figured it out before I could say anything. We slammed our fists on the wall in desperation, but nothing happened. We yelled so loud our ears hurt, but nobody heard. After a while, we just stood there in silence. Sydney broke it when she began to cry. I instinctively wrapped my arms around her and pulled her close. Hey, it's gonna be okay. It's just a trick, right? We can figure this out. Like an escape room, remember? I felt her head shake up and down against my chest, and her shoulders began to relax. We came back out into the empty dorm room and I glanced out the window again. The figure was gone. Sydney noticed too. We looked at each other but didn't say anything. I began scanning the room for any sort of clue on what we should be doing, but I couldn't find a single thing. I think we need to try the front door. She sounded like she was trying not to cry again. I gave her a slow nod. I was dreading having to open it even more now that the thing outside was gone. I checked the peephole again, but it was still dark. I placed my hand around the doorknob and began to gently turn, quietly as possible. I felt a subtle click in my palm and slowly cracked the door open. I peeked through the sliver of space and gasped. I expected to see a hallway, but the door led straight outside. I opened it more to get a better view, revealing an empty field, just like what we were seeing through the window. No lights, no buildings, no cars. Nothing in sight, nothing at all except tall grass. Sydney pushed past me and stepped out the door, frantically looking around. She started hyperventilating, and I think she was having a panic attack. I tried to tell her to come back, but it was like she couldn't hear me. I started yelling, and still no acknowledgement. She was wandering out too far, and I was getting scared. Finally, I stepped out the door, walked up to her, and placed a hand on her shoulder. She flinched hard and spun around. When she looked at me, her eyes went wide and her face drained of all color. Then she let out an ear-splitting scream so loud, my hands reflexively sprang up to my ears to cover them. She shot off in a dead sprint, and I turned around expecting something to be behind me, but there wasn't. Was she scared of me? When I turned back, she was already fading out of sight. I ran after her, screaming, "Sid, Sid, please come back." I chased her a few minutes, but it was so dark I couldn't see anything. The only light source was coming from the dorm room door that was still left wide open. I completely lost sight of her. Scared and confused, I ran back to the door and noticed that it was just a door. I could see into the room, but there was no building on the outside. It just stood there like a portal between worlds. I rushed in, fearing that it would suddenly close at the last second and trap me in the field, but it didn't. I stood in the empty room trying to gather my thoughts. I hated myself for losing Sydney, but she had to come back, right? There was nowhere else to go. She had to come back. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw something pressed up against the glass of the window on the other side of the room. When I turned my head, it scurried out of sight. I could tell that it wasn't the figure from before. It was smaller and shaped differently. Then I remembered that the door was still open. I quickly darted over to it, and before I slammed it shut, I could hear a rustling in the grass growing closer. I locked the door, and almost immediately, the handle started violently shaking. I screamed and fell to the ground, filled with terror. There was a muffled, angry moan from the other side. Whatever was out there started pounding on the door so hard that I thought for sure it would break right off the hinges. I scrambled back into the closet and shut it. I made myself as small as I could, cowering in the corner, and then began to sob uncontrollably. After a long time, the noises calmed down, but I didn't dare move. I don't know how long I sat there curled up on the floor. I think I must have lost consciousness at some point because I remember the feeling of waking up. I was in the same position, but my muscles felt stiff, like I hadn't moved for several hours. There were shadows moving around the door now. The feeling of dread washed over me again as I remembered the situation that I was still apparently trapped in. I stood up and made my way to the closet door. I pressed my ear up to the wood and jumped when I was met with 3 gentle knocks from the other side. "Who's there?" No reply. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to be polite and open the door, so I did. The thing on the other side was dressed in rags. Its gray skin was shriveled and its head was bald. It was like staring at rotten fruit, but in human form. I stepped into the room, which looked like it had been abandoned for years now. The paint was flaking, the ceiling was cracked, and the window was so dirty you couldn't see through it at all. The gray creature bowed its head to me, like it was giving thanks. then entered the closet that I just exited. When the door closed, I noticed there were several more of them waiting in a line. They were all wearing similar clothing, old stained cloth poorly sewn together like makeshift cloaks. None of them looked at me. They all kept their heads down and seemed to be shivering. I think they were in pain. The way they clutched themselves shakily, the small raspy noises that came from them as they exhaled, it reminded me of being sick with the flu. At first I was scared, but then I felt pity. Not knowing what to do, I went to the front door again and looked through the peephole. To my surprise, the hallway was on the other side. I ripped the door open to discover that the rest of the building was in the same condition as the dorm room. I stepped out and peered down both ways out of the hall, and then faced the room again. The gray, wrinkly things weren't shivering anymore. They stood up straight now, revealing how deceptively tall they were. Before, they wouldn't even look in my direction. Now they were all silently making eye contact with me. It made me feel uneasy. I bowed my head slowly, like the first one did to me, and then I closed the door on them. I'm not sure if that was the right move, but they were creeping me out. They didn't seem to be making any objection to me leaving. But either way, I sprinted to the front entrance of the building and flung the doors open, only to be met with disappointment. It was morning now, and all I could see in every direction was an endless expanse of grassy fields. I stared at the emptiness for a while, calling out Sydney's name and hoping that maybe she would hear me. I knew that I wouldn't get a response, though. I turned around and began to take in the dormitory complex that used to be a really nice building. Now it looked like it had been rotting for decades. I decided to go back inside. Maybe those gray things could help me somehow. I didn't want to face them again, especially after how they were looking at me when I left, but I didn't know what else to do. Then I realized that I didn't actually know what door that was. It was connected to Levi's. I guess that would make it 1114. I started making my way back in the direction I came from when I heard movement. I froze in place. It sounded like someone was rummaging through something metallic. Slowly, I tiptoed to the corner and peeked around it. The thing that was pressed up against the window last night at the end of the hallway attempted to get into the vending machines. I got a much better look at it this time, and the image will be forever burned into my brain. It had human skin and human limbs, but way too many of them. The way it crawled around was spider-like. Some of its arms were tiny and frail, while others were freakishly long and muscular. Its mouth and eyes were way too big for how small its bald head was, and the whole body was covered with dark bruises. I got the feeling that it wasn't always like this. Some sort of terrible mutation experiment gone wrong. I don't know, but it was horrible to look at. It didn't seem to notice me, so I slowly crept towards room 1114. I got all the way down the hallway and made it to the door without making a sound. I was a lot closer to the creature now, but it was completely preoccupied with the vending machine still. Gently, I began to twist the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. I tried harder, and it still wouldn't budge. They locked me out, I whispered to myself. Big mistake. The creature heard me even though I spoke so quietly. Its head jerked in my direction, and suddenly, I was staring into its deep black eyes. Neither of us moved for a second, then it lunged forward. A dozen bony limbs scrambled into action, propelling the creature towards me at unreal speed. I sprinted down the opposite way of the hall, and it let out a deep, hateful moan as it pursued me. It was gaining on me, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to outrun it. I had to think of something fast. I don't think I could successfully fight it, so the only other option was to hide. My own dorm room was coming up, and I made the split decision to try it. Thank God the door was unlocked. I slammed it behind me as fast as I could and locked it. The creature was enraged and threw a tantrum just like it had done the night before. I sat on the bed, which was covered in a thick layer of dust now, and waited for the freakish thing to leave. Eventually, it did. And that's when I heard something new. Coming from my own closet was the sound of radio chatter. I got up and quickly went to the back. I cried tears of relief when I found another door. Without wasting a second, I opened it and stepped through. 3 cops were staring at me like I was a ghost. I was back in Levi's room. The investigators were dumbfounded. They had already searched the closet and everything else in Levi's room. And here I was, appearing out of it like Houdini 6 hours later. They rechecked the closet after I returned, but the door at the end was gone again. Me and Levi were brought to the police station for questioning. I told them everything, and it must have sounded crazy. But I wasn't the only one. All of the other students that went into the closet had already given their accounts. For a long time, Levi and I were the primary suspects in the Sydney Baker missing persons case. But they didn't have anything to go off of, and eventually it was all dropped. They even demolished the entire building, probably expecting to find her corpse in the walls or something, but nothing turned up. Now the only way of getting her back is destroyed, and every night I'm haunted by the thought of her being trapped in that hellscape. I've tried reaching out to Sydney's family, but they don't want anything to do with me. They blame me for her disappearance and probably think I killed her. I can't even be upset with them. It's the most logical explanation. I ended up dropping out of school and moved halfway across the country to distance myself from the trauma. My therapist suggested that I should write my story down. She thinks that it will help me find some sort of closure, but here we are at the end and I still feel as lost as ever. I haven't given up on Sydney. I don't think I ever will. I spend all my free time searching the internet for ways to get back to her. I've read hundreds of stories from people claiming to discover gateways that led to the other worlds, but none of them seem legit or similar to my experience. None of them, except one. I've been messaging a guy named Chuck who claims to have found a place that shouldn't exist. He described it as infinite farmlands as far as the eye can see. It's the most promising lead I've had yet. I'm meeting up with Chuck next week. He strictly told me to not tell anybody about where this place is or how to access it, and I swore that I wouldn't. I know it sounds sketchy, but there's something about this guy. I think I believe him. Wish me luck. I'm still trying to figure out how to start this off. I've never done this before, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form some kind of great storyteller. What I am is a woman with a fairly boring job, with the occasional burst of weirdness. I work for a company that does transcriptions. Work is in quotations because technically we're just freelancers. Honestly, I doubt any of y'all give a single solitary crap about the ins and outs of my job, so yeah, I'm just gonna jump to the chase here. So most days the audio we get is fairly mundane. Interviews, surveys, just random marketing or legal things people want to have transcribed for whatever reason. Sometimes though, we get surprisingly interesting things, like maybe a police interrogation. I've got one of those twice so far, or once. An interview between a lawyer and a potential client. I've heard of other people getting like private audio. By private, I mean apparently some weird guy recorded himself having phone sex with someone multiple times. Also, the audio was the worst quality, so I'm glad I never got any of those. Then there were the days when something truly weird pops up. Weirder than the phone sex thing, I mean. Like spooky weird. I'd never gotten one myself, just read about them from other transcribers in our group Discord. The Discord is absolutely not company approved. The company doesn't really like us speaking with each other beyond anything work related really. But screw that. As I was saying though, I'd never personally gotten one of those types. just heard about them from others who had stumbled across them. I have to say, some of the audio logs people have talked about, had to listen to, left us all feeling pretty unnerved. One person ended up quitting entirely after they had the supreme misfortune of taking on a particularly disturbing audio. They refused to give too much detail, claimed they were, and I quote, sparing you all from having nightmares infecting you too. The way they had worded that had left a lot of us creeped out enough, and left more than a few of us worried when they fell out of contact without a word. Not just on Discord. A few of us had their socials, and there hasn't been a peep from them since that message. A message that was left over a year ago. Back on the topic at hand, though. My personal winning streak of not having to deal with any of that BS came to an exceptionally dramatic end a few days ago. I'll admit, in the past, when I heard about them, I was a little curious about those types of audios, in a very morbid way. Any curiosity I had usually had been its death throes after reading about an especially gruesome audio. Everything that happened with the acquaintance I mentioned earlier, that one that completely vanished, yeah, any ounce of curiosity I had left was practically beaten to death with a shovel. What I'm saying is I'd come to the conclusion that there were something I'd really rather not have to listen to. Enough of my rambling. I'm going to post a copy of the transcription below. Yes, that is insanely illegal, which is why I'm not naming the company, myself, or the Discord group, and it is very much why I abandoned the thing even after I finished. I don't think I'll be linked back to my account if someone else picks it up. They're only ever marked as previously abandoned when we pick up a dropped audio, so whoever takes credit for doing it, hopefully, shouldn't face anything. I got points docked for dropping it after the allotted grace time, but I'd rather have as little tying me to this as possible. You know? Anyway, enjoy, I guess. Transcription begins. Male interviewer 1. I know you've been here for several hours now, Mrs. Smith, but we need you to go over this just one more time for us. It will help our investigation immensely, and could potentially save lives. Are you ready? Mrs. Smith. Yeah, I guess. Why, can I get some water or something? Male interviewer 2. That won't be possible at the moment, Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Smith. You can't just take a moment to get me some water? Male interviewer 1. I apologize, ma'am. I know you must be thirsty, but we need to get this done as fast as possible. The sooner it's done, the sooner it can be used to aid us. I give you my word. Once we're finished, I can make sure you get some water. Mrs. Smith. Fine. Yeah, okay. So like I said already, multiple times in fact. Male interviewer 1. We do apologize for that, but it's important, Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Smith. Right. So, right. I've had this entire camping trip planned out for a few months now. It was going to be my sister, our cousin, and myself. At the last moment, though, that had my sister dropping out at the last minute, so it wound up just being me and my cousin. We weren't, the closest, but we got on pretty well. Well enough that it would still be a fun trip. She was closer to my sister. Male interviewer 2. So you weren't by yourself on this trip? Mrs. Smith. I literally said my cousin was with me. It was myself and my cousin, so logically, I wasn't by myself. Male interviewer 2. I understand your frustration, ma'am, but there's no need for yelling. Please try to calm down. Mrs. Smith. Calm down? Calm down? Have you not been listening? Male interviewer 1. Mrs. Smith, my colleague misspoke. We're aware this situation has been for you, but we have to ascertain that we're understanding everything perfectly. Do you need a break? Mrs. Smith. Audible sobbing. Male interviewer 1. Alright, we're going to take a short break. Audio resumes. Male interviewer 2. Are you ready to resume, ma'am? Mrs. Smith. Yes, okay. So, as I said earlier, it was just my cousin and I, and it was only supposed to be a weekend thing, so we didn't bring much with us. There's this diner that she loved, and we were just going there for breakfast and dinner. We brought some hot dogs because what's a camping trip without hot dogs, right? Yeah, so we left my place Friday night. I want to say noon, noonish. We got to the campsite around 4 or so. Male interviewer 1. 4 p.m. Mrs. Smith. Yeah, yes, 4 p.m. Male interviewer 2. Please continue. Mrs. Smith. Right, okay, so we got to the campsite around 4, and the first thing getting our tents set up. Male interviewer 1. You had separate tents? Mrs. Smith. Yeah, you saw them, right? At our campsite, there are these... Male interviewer 2. There wasn't much left of either of your tents, Mrs. Smith, which is why we needed clarification. Mrs. Smith. Oh, okay. I didn't... I hadn't been back to the campsite. I didn't know. Male interviewer 1. We understand, Mrs. Smith. Please continue. Mrs. Smith. Okay, we had separate tents, like I said, and had taken us, my sister and I mean, camping all the time when we were younger, so, getting them set up was easy. After that, we went to the diner for dinner. That would have, I think it was around 8. We made it back close to 10. It was dark out. Male interviewer 2. What did you notice once you'd... Mrs. Smith. We started a campfire. We wanted to roast some marshmallows after going to bed. Make some s'mores. It was... At this point, the audio became severely distorted for several minutes before resuming. Mrs. Smith. I don't know what time it was exactly. When I checked my phone, the battery was dead. I remember thinking that was weird because it hadn't been a little over 50% when I went to sleep, but yeah, it was dead. So yeah, it's hard to say the exact time it had been. Interviewer 2. If you had to guess though, what would you say, ma'am? Mrs. Smith. I thought you needed to be perfectly clear about everything. Isn't that what you said? Interviewer 1. We do need to be precise as we can, Mrs. Smith. However, having the beginnings of a timeline would prove immensely helpful to us. Mrs. Smith. Right. Yeah. Sorry. If I had to guess, maybe somewhere around 6, maybe a little before that. It wasn't dawn yet, but it wasn't completely dark either. Interviewer 2. Perfect, thank you. Mrs. Smith, continue please. Mrs. Smith. Yeah, sure. It was before dawn. And my cousin wasn't an early riser. She'd normally never get out of bed before 10 on the weekends, but it was hearing her that woke me up. Interviewer 1. Hearing her? What do you mean? Mrs. Smith. I heard her talking. I thought at first that she did that sometimes, but I realized pretty fast that her voice was coming from somewhere in front of my tent. Her tent had been beside mine. Interviewer 1. I see. Could you hear what she was saying? Mrs. Smith. Not, not really. No, I heard the tone, though it was the same tone she used on stray cats and dogs when we were kids. Just really gentle. Do you know what I mean? I heard her talking like that, and I immediately thought she was doing something stupid, like trying to pet a raccoon or something. Interviewer two. Was that what she was doing, Mrs. Smith? Mrs. Smith. You know it wasn't. You know what? Interviewer two. Mrs. Smith, do you need to take a break? Mrs. Smith. I don't need a break. I need you to stop asking me these stupid questions. You know exactly what she found. I've told you and told you and told you, but you keep making me repeat it, making me remember it. I got out of my tent and I saw her and I saw that thing and it looked like a deer. It looked like a deer, but it was so wrong. And looking at it made my skin crawl. But she was trying to help it. She thought it was sick and she. Interviewer 1. I know this is hard for you, Mrs. Smith. I understand it's incredibly unfair of us to ask you to go through this, but we have no choice. If we want to prevent this from happening again in the future, we have to ask these questions. We have to get a clear picture of what happened. Now, please, can you continue? Mrs. Smith. God, yeah, I I can continue. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for. Interviewer 1. There's no need to apologize, Mrs. Smith. Your reaction is understandable given the circumstances. Mrs. Smith. Thanks. Thank you. There was a deer, and she was, crouched in front of it. Really, really close. And she had her hand held out, and the deer was so wrong. It was so wrong. I don't, I don't understand how she could stand to look at it. I don't know what she. Interviewer 2. What do you mean, Mrs. Smith? When you say it was wrong, could you elaborate, please? Mrs. Smith. Yeah, yeah. It was still a little dark out, but it. There was enough light to see that its face was it was really messed up. I mean, its jaw, its bottom jaw was just hanging off. Not like its mouth was open or broken. I mean, it was hanging off. I think the only thing keeping it attached was, God, its skin and muscle. Just that. The deer would move its head and its jaw would sway like a wind chime. Interviewer 1. Mrs. Smith, do you need the trash can? Mrs. Smith, no, I'm okay. Oh, Christ. Yeah, I need it. Audio resumes. Mrs. Smith, God, I'm so sorry. Interviewer 1. It's fine, Mrs. Smith. You experienced something traumatic. That was a perfectly normal reaction. Mrs. Smith. The only thing normal about any of this. Interviewer 2. Are you well enough to continue, ma'am? Mrs. Smith. Yeah, I'm good. Was the most noticeable, but there was a lot wrong with it. The way it was standing, the way its body was angled. I could see some of its side. There was skin missing. I mean, I'm pretty sure I saw part of its rib cage. Oh, something pale, but I remember that it looked mobile. Interviewer 2. What do you mean by mobile, Mrs. Smith? Mrs. Smith. I mean, it looked like it was moving. Like it was squirming almost, but that's not quite. I mean, I don't think that's the right word, but it's all I can think of to describe it. It looked wrong. I don't understand how she could have seen that thing and felt like it was safe to approach. How was it even standing? It should have been dead. It should have been dead, but it was standing there. And she was crouching and talking, and she had her hand held out, and I saw its throat bulging. It was bulging, and it was grotesque. Like something was moving and pushing, and did she see it? Did she see what it was doing? Interviewer 2. If this is anything like similar reports we've received, it's very likely she didn't, Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Smith. What do you mean? What is this? What does that mean? Interviewer 2. Could you continue, please, Mrs. Smith? Mrs. Smith. No, I can't continue. What does that mean? What the hell does that mean? She didn't. How could she not? Interviewer 1. I realize this is stressful and frightening for you, Mrs. Smith, but we need you to continue, please. Mrs. Smith. Jesus Christ. Fine, right. I just want to know why this happened. Interviewer 1. I give you my word, Mrs. Smith. Once you've finished giving this final statement, we'll make sure you understand everything. Mrs. Smith. Thank you, really, okay. The throat was bulging, like I said. It was bulging and moving, and out of its mouth, something came out. It looked like an arm, not normal. God, nothing was normal. Nothing was normal about any of it. But the arm, my cousin was maybe 2 feet away from the deer, right? 2 feet. And the arm, the fingers came out first, out of the deer's mouth, came out wiggling, and they were pale. They shone in the moonlight, and they were wet. Not from blood. It didn't look dark enough. Interviewer 2. What happened next, Mrs. Smith? Mrs. Smith. Next? Jesus Christ. Next was the rest of the arm, as pale as the fingers, and it was long, and it looked segmented, but not segmented exactly. It was like too many elbows. The deer's jaw, it fell off, dropped to the ground, and the arm kept stretching towards, and she just stayed there crouching. I was screaming then. I remember that. I was screaming at her for her to move, to run something, but she just stayed there. I think she was talking to the thing. And oh God, it grabbed her, the arm grabbed her, and it started pulling her back with it. It was withdrawing back into the deer, and it was bringing her with it. And she never screamed, not once, not even when I could hear her bones breaking and she was being folded in half. And she never screamed, and I ran. Oh God. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I ran. I left her. Interviewer 1. I know this has been difficult for you, Mrs. Smith. I appreciate your going over this with us. Would you like that water now, ma'am? Mrs. Smith. God, yes, please. I could really use some water. Male interviewer 1. Absolutely, Mrs. Smith. Can you bring her some water to drink? I believe we're finished now. Male interviewer 2. Of course. Male interviewer 1. There we go. And still cold as well. I'm sure that will help. Mrs. Smith. Yeah, I've been talking for hours and... yeah, thank you. Male interviewer 1. Make sure to drink it all. It will likely help you feel better. Mrs. Smith, I am, thanks. Several minutes pass at this point in silence. Mrs. Smith, I I feel kind of weird. I think dizzy. I don't feel so good. I think I need help. Male interviewer 1. You have nothing to worry about, Mrs. Smith. That's perfectly normal. Mrs. Smith. Normal? What? What? Male interviewer 1. I gave you my word you'd learn what happened. Your statements have been taken. Your cooperation noted. And I believe now it's time you found out. I don't mean they'd leave for a party or a night out. No, they'd vanish, gone without a trace by sunset, leaving me alone in the house. I'd search for them, call their names, but they were always gone, like they'd never existed. It wasn't something we ever talked about. The next morning they'd be back, acting as if nothing had happened, like it was just another night. But it wasn't. I knew that. I learned that the hard way. It all started when I was 6 years old. I remember that first Halloween like it was yesterday. I was dressed as a witch, excited to go trick-or-treating, but just as the sun dipped below the horizon, I noticed the house felt different. Cold, quiet, too quiet. I ran through the halls calling for my mom and dad, but no one answered. Panic set in. I thought maybe they were hiding, playing a prank, but after what felt like hours of searching, I realized they were gone. The front door was locked, the windows were shut, and I was completely alone. That's when I found the first note. It was on the kitchen table, written in my mom's familiar handwriting. It simply said, Rule 1. Stay in your room. Do not come out until sunrise. Whatever you hear, ignore it. I didn't understand then. I was confused, scared, and alone. I didn't want to stay in my room. I wanted to find my parents. But something about the note made me follow the instructions. I took a flashlight and a pillow, locked myself in the room, and crawled under the covers. I thought maybe it was some kind of weird game. I wasn't sure. That night, I didn't sleep much. The house creaked and groaned more than usual. I heard strange noises, soft scratching at my door, footsteps in the hallway, whispers that I couldn't quite make out. I told myself it was the wind or my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was in the house with me. The next morning when I opened my door, my parents were back. They were sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. I asked them where they'd gone, what had happened, but they just smiled and said I must have had a bad dream. That was the beginning. Every Halloween after that was the same. My parents would disappear just before nightfall, leaving me alone with a note. Each year the instructions got a little more specific, a little more ominous. By the time I was 8, the notes included things like Rule 2, don't look out the windows, and Rule 3, don't respond if someone calls your name. And the noises, they got worse. One year, I was 9. The sounds outside my room became unbearable. There were knocks on the door, not gentle but loud, insistent pounding. I pressed my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut, but I couldn't block it out. The voice on the other side was familiar, my mother's voice calling my name. Ellie, it's okay. You can come out now. She sounded so calm, so normal. For a second, I almost believed it really was her, but the rule had been clear. Do not open the door, no matter what you hear. So I didn't. I stayed under the covers, trembling until the knocking stopped. I never told my parents about the voice, and they never asked. The years passed and the game continued. It became a twisted Halloween tradition. While other kids dressed up and collected candy, I stayed inside, locked in my room, listening to the house come alive with things I couldn't see. I became used to the notes, the strange noises, and the feeling of being watched. It was all part of the game, my own haunted ritual. But when I turned 13, everything changed. That year, the note was different. I found it on my bed just as the sun was setting, but instead of the usual instructions, it said, Rule 4. There's something new in the house tonight. Be careful. I didn't know what that meant, but the moment I read it, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something new. What did that mean? I locked my door as usual and tried to settle in for the night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The noises started earlier than usual. At first, it was the familiar creaks and footsteps. I'd gotten used to those, but then there was something else. Breathing. I could hear it, low and heavy just outside my door. It wasn't human. It was too slow, too deep. I pressed myself against the headboard, clutching my flashlight like a weapon, even though I knew it wouldn't help. The breathing moved away after a while, but then came the scratching. It wasn't at my door this time. It was coming from inside my room. I whipped the flashlight around, scanning the walls, the ceiling, but there was nothing. The scratching grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was coming from beneath my bed. My heart pounded in my chest, my throat dry with fear. I didn't dare look under the bed. I was too scared of what I might find. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by a soft, childlike giggle. The sound of it froze the blood in my veins. It wasn't me. It wasn't my parents. Something was in the room with me. I backed up against the wall, holding the flashlight out in front of me like it could protect me from whatever was there. The giggling continued, soft and mocking. I whispered to myself, "It's not real. It's just a game." But I didn't believe it anymore. Suddenly there was a loud bang on the door. The whole room seemed to shake with the force of it. I dropped the flashlight, plunging myself into darkness. The breathing was back, but this time it was right outside my door. Bang. Another hit. The door shuddered. Bang. The lock rattled. Whatever was out there was trying to get in. I scrambled to pick up the flashlight, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The banging grew more violent, each hit sounding like the door was about to give in. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. Pure, deafening silence. I held my breath, waiting, listening for any sign of movement. Then the voice returned, soft and sweet like honey. "Ellie, it's okay. You can come out now." It was my mother's voice again, but this time I knew it wasn't her. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just sat there, frozen in fear, praying for the night to end. The voice called out again, more insistent this time. "Ellie, don't be scared. It's just a game." My hands were trembling, and I could barely hold on to the flashlight. The voice kept calling, but I stayed silent. I knew the rules. I knew I couldn't open the door, but then something strange happened. The door, it began to unlock. I heard the soft click of the lock turning, and the handle slowly twisted. "No," I whispered, pressing myself against the wall, willing the door to stay shut, but it was too late. The door cracked open, just a crack, but enough for me to see a shadow in the hallway. Something tall and thin, its limbs too long, its fingers clawed. It wasn't my mother. The creature stood in the doorway, unmoving, watching me. I could feel its eyes on me even though I couldn't see its face. My heart was pounding in my chest and I felt like I might pass out. And then, just as it stepped forward, the first rays of sunlight crept through the window. The creature recoiled, hissing like an animal, and within seconds it was gone. The door slammed shut, and the house was quiet again. I didn't leave my room until the sun was fully up. When I finally opened the door, the house was just as it had been the night before. Silent, empty, as if nothing had happened. My parents were back, sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee like they always did. I stumbled in, shaken and pale, and told them everything. The creature, the scratching, the voice that wasn't my mother's. They just looked at me, exchanged glances, and then my dad's laughed softly. "You must have had a bad dream," he said, shaking his head. "Nothing like that happened, Ellie. It was just your imagination." My mom smiled that same strange smile and added, "You're safe now. It's over." But I knew better. I knew it wasn't just a dream. The fear, the things I'd heard and seen, they were real. They had to be. My parents didn't believe me. They never did, and that was the most terrifying part. Now, as an adult with children of my own, I know the truth. Whatever haunted me in that house, whatever played that sick game, it's still out there, waiting, and it's hungry. I fear for the lives of my children. I'll never let them go through what I went through. I'll protect them at all costs, even if it means never celebrating Halloween, never letting the night touch them the way it touched me. Because I know deep down that it's only a matter of time before the game starts again. Halloween is coming. This probably requires some backstory. Years ago, back when the town was first founded, one of the buildings, the schoolhouse actually, collapsed during a town meeting and killed several people. The town was too new to have a proper graveyard yet, so they buried them in the forest towards the edge of town, planting a maple tree at each grave. Obviously, that was almost 100 years ago, but the forest still stands there. The town has kind of developed around it, but no one, not even the big corporations that have moved in, have suggested building there. It's something of an open secret. No one in the town really speaks of it, and it's not in any of the history books. My history teacher told me back in middle school that if the town acknowledges it, then they have to change the zoning and junk. Everyone knows about it though, which leads me to what happened tonight, the first senior guard night. It's a tradition dating back to just about the day they rebuilt the school, if the rumors are to be believed. The senior class goes into the woods, starting with the first frost, finds the graves, and stands vigil over them. Tonight's not exactly a full moon, but the forecast is predicting non-stop rain after tonight. It was chilly, and the leaves that had fallen were crunching underfoot as we made our way into the woods. Spotting the graves was like second nature to us, who'd grown up in the shadows of the trees. The trick is to spot a maple tree of about the right age, and then check underneath for a divot in the earth. As the bodies decomposed, the earth caved in on them, leaving pockmarks in an otherwise smooth forest. The town is small now, but it was straight up tiny then, and there are more students than there are graves, meaning some of us have to double up. I'd volunteered to take Jaden, the new kid as it were, with me. He tromped next to me, all but pouting at being stuck with me. He'd been hoping to have one of the girls take him with her, but no such luck. Tonight was too important for flirting. I was trying to explain everything to him, the history, the tradition, the rules, but I could tell he wasn't listening. He kept pulling out his phone even though we didn't have service, and then tripping because he wasn't watching his feet. I wanted to groan, but I held myself back. I mean, it was annoying, but he had just moved here. The fact that he had agreed to do it at all was a win. I spotted the grave ahead in the pale light of my flashlight and nudged him to get his attention as I stopped in front of our grave for the night. As I shed my backpack, I heard the rest of our classmates getting into position all around us. Nothing but the sound of footsteps in the dark. Excuse me. I recognized the voice from a few trees over. My lighter isn't working. Can someone help? Give me a moment, I called back, dropping my backpack and digging through it. My brother had told me to pack multiple ways to start a fire, and I remember being glad I had followed his advice as I pulled out a book of matches from my front pouch. Next to me, Jaden had shifted uncomfortably, and I had barely looked up as I reassured him. I'll be right back. You'll be fine. Bentley was crouched down over her grave, frantically flicking the lighter. She flinched when I came around the corner, but relaxed when she saw it was me. I know my lighter was working back at the house, but I can't get my hand steady enough to light it. She smiled shakily. No worries. I squatted down next to her. Where's your candle? Right here. She held out a large glass candle with a picture of sheets online on the front. My mom packed me like 7 extra. She's worried about me. I gave her a tense grin as I struck a match. My family's the same way. I don't think any of my candles smell this good, though. She gave me a small grin in return. Right, you guys are super traditional. Well, I'm better than Caleb. He brought tea candles. Tea candles? The flame danced for a moment at the end of the match before catching the wick alight. Those aren't going to last the whole night. She clutched her candle in both hands, looking relieved now that it was lit. He brought like 2 whole bags. He's not too worried. I gave her my matchbook as I stood up, telling her that it was a good idea to have another way to light her candle, just in case. I wish we could have teamed up, she'd mumbled as I headed back to Jaden. The last bit isn't too important to what happened, I guess, but I'm not leaving it out. Back by our grave, Jaden wasn't too happy, and I sighed before going about setting us up too. According to my watch, we had 18 more minutes before midnight. The only thing we'd told Jaden to bring besides his coat was a candle, but he told me he hadn't. My mom told me I wasn't allowed to be out here in the woods with a lit candle. She said if it was that important, I could play a video of a candle burning on my phone. Rolling my eyes, I dug out 2 beeswax candles from my backpack and passed one to him. He protested, but I promised I wouldn't tell his mom, and he finally went quiet. I didn't have a second candle holder, so I instructed him to hold it tilted away, so the dripping wax wouldn't land on him, and get us both lit. All around me, little pinpricks of light flares as everyone finished getting ready. The forest was eerily still as the last few minutes crept by. I didn't have to look at my watch to know when midnight hit. A low moaning swept through the grass, and even through my many layers. I felt a chill take hold. Any conversation that had been going on died, and we all braced ourselves for the night to come. Well, almost all of us. The heck? Jaden muttered. Then the wind started up, rustling through the leaves that hadn't fallen yet, before building in strength, tearing at our clothes. Through it all, my candle flame never wavered, pointing straight up. Dude, Jaden was up in my face now, candle dangerously close. What is going on? I shoved him back, harder than I meant to. I told you, these are graves. Graves outside of a cemetery. It was clear that the importance was lost on him. Just as suddenly as the wind arose, it stopped, and mist began to rise. Cemetery, graves, whatever. They're consecrated. I started whispering low and fast. But they couldn't do that with this one, because the priest died in the accident too, which means that these graves are left without any protection. Jaden gave me a horrified look. Protection from what? I didn't have time to answer him as the screaming started, first at one side of the forest, and then the other, until the whole woods was filled with it. It sounded like my classmates, but I knew it wasn't them. I could still see their lights, shining clearly through the mist, through the trees. One particularly clear scream sounded just like Bentley, and Jaden jerked away from me towards her. I tried to grab at him to keep him from stepping off the grave, but stumbled against him as he stopped abruptly. The two of us tumbled down, and I saw his candle hit the ground a moment before mine did. Outside of our hands, they immediately went dark. The forest froze into painful stillness. The cold that I'd felt creeping up my coat seized me fully, and I could feel something, hovering over Jaden and I. I knew it was all my fault. I was supposed to protect Jaden, teach him about tonight, but instead I was the very one to shove us into danger. I hunched over him as best I could, even as I felt claws of pure ice slide straight through my coat to my skin. I am the guardian of the lost graves. Bentley's voice, thin and shaky, rose up through the night. And so long as my fire burns, you will not touch the lost souls here. The claws hesitated but didn't stop, and I shivered uncontrollably. I knew that when they reached my heart, it would stop. I am the guardian of the lost graves. This time it was Caleb's voice. Caleb with his 20 lit tea candles, shouting out into the night. The claws slipped past a rib, and I shuddered as they began to move in me. All around us, voices flared up. My classmates shouting to hold back the darkness as well as they could, trying to help me in the only way they could. It wasn't enough. Beneath me, Jaden moved and I pulled back. If the thing got through me, he was next. He needed to get away. Maybe he could make it to the safety of Bentley's candle before I did. Jaden was fumbling, and it wasn't until he grabbed my hand, wrapping it in his own, that I realized what he was doing. The candle? He'd gotten his candle back, and now it was clasped between our hands. I was shaking so hard I could barely control my movements, but I reached into my pocket and yanked out the matchbook I'd used to light our candles earlier. I dropped it, unable to stop the tremors, but Jaden must have felt it fall on him. He let go of my hand momentarily, and a teardrop of light bloomed suddenly in front of me, almost in my hair. Like it realized the danger it was in, the creature moved faster, and my breath plumed as I started breathing frost. The flame danced, but caught the wick at the last moment. We, Jaden's voice trembled, not unlike the candle we clenched in our hands. We are the guardians of... It took all my strength of will to breathe out the next words through frozen teeth, guiding him. Of the lost graves. Jaden shouted the words that I hissed, and the claws flinched back. And so long as my fire burns, and so long as my fire burns, you will not touch the lost souls here. Touch the lost souls here. There was a ripping sound, and the horrible weight was gone. It was a long, cold night. Jaden lit every candle I had in the bag and forced me to take off my coat to do first aid. He hissed when he saw my back. Dude, this is going to hurt tomorrow. He was right. Lying here and typing is about the only thing I can manage with my back all torn up like this. My mom freaked when she saw it. The lost graves are safe for another year, but I swear, I can still feel the cold claws hovering right behind my back. It all started when we were walking to the bus stop. I've never bothered getting a car because of how cheap and mostly reliable public transport was here. A friend of mine worked close to my office, so we often took the same bus home. Lately, I've noticed an increase in pigeons downtown and near where we waited for the bus. Personally, I liked the birds. I thought they were a bit goofy, and aside from all the poop they left, I didn't think they were a problem. My friend, Matt, hated them. He often had a new insult for the birds. That day was no different. At least 20 pecked around at the sidewalk in our path. He ran at them to startle them, causing the flock to move further down. I frowned at him for being so cruel. I think any city with a pigeon problem also has a pigeon person. Someone who appeared homeless, took care of the birds, or treated them as if they were friends. Our local pigeon man was between us and the bus stop. He was dressed in a long black coat regardless of the weather. He fed and petted the birds as he talked with them. He had a beard, but it didn't appear unkempt. I wondered if he had a home, and pigeons were just a hobby. He also had a sign made of cardboard asking for donations. He listed how much money it would cost to feed the pigeons he was so fond of. $1.50 for a loaf of bread, to $25 for a month's worth of croutons. Matt nodded towards the man, ready to mock him, but I gave him a look to shut him up. We started to walk by them while dodging birds at our feet. The man tore off pieces from a freshly baked loaf of bread. There wouldn't be nearly enough for all the birds. I feel bad for them. I made it 3 steps past them as I sighed and turned around. Matt expected this. I have always been a bit of a pushover. He waited as I went over to the man and read over his sign again. They'll repay the favor, the man said, not looking away from the birds. They will? I asked while trying to decide how much to donate. These birds are better than people. They're special. They don't accept anything for free, so they'll repay you. I had 100 eyes on me. It appeared as if all the birds were watching as I pulled 2 bills from my wallet. I had recently snagged some overtime at work so I could afford to pay for a month's worth of croutons for the birds. The man accepted the money and nodded a small thanks. A few birds flapped their wings as Matt tapped his foot, showing a sign he wanted to keep moving. Don't forget to take care of yourself, I told him and joined my friend. He's probably just going to buy some drugs, Matt said, even though we weren't out of earshot just yet. Good for him either way, I shrugged. We could still see the man and the flock of pigeons from our bus stop. True to his word, he went inside the small store he had been standing in front of and came outside with a big bag of croutons. At least someone was taking care of the poor birds. But wasn't bread bad for them? It made them happy, so that was something. Our bus arrived and I had forgotten all about the exchange. It was only until a small incident happened a week later that I was reminded of the pigeon man. I had been about to cross the street and had stepped off the curb when a pigeon flew in front of my face, scaring the hell out of me. Thankfully it did, because a car turned when it shouldn't have. If I didn't step back, I would have been hit. I stood stunned over what happened, my heart racing a mile a minute. Looking up, I spotted the bird that saved my life sitting on a power line. I could have sworn it nodded at me. The day after I nearly died, I was walking to the bus stop, but without Matt. The pigeon man was sitting on the ground looking after his birds again. I walked over to him and got down low so we could talk. I only have this much on me today, I said, offering a $5 bill. You still have 3 weeks left, he said, and didn't reach out to take the offered cash. I was confused. Glancing over, I saw so many of those birds staring in my direction. Their eyes appeared as if they understood what was going on. A pigeon helped me out the other day. I wanted to repay it. Here. He finally took the bill and I stood back up. It would be nice if I could feed the bird that saved my life regardless of whether it meant to or not. But who knew what one it was? And I also hoped this man was taking care of himself and not just the birds. I noticed my bus drive by us. I darted down the street hoping to catch it in time. I scared a few birds as I ran down the street, expecting the bus to drive away at any second. When I reached the stop, I noticed the reason why it hadn't moved. A bunch of pigeons were sitting in the road blocking the bus and other traffic. They flew off after I got on. To be honest, I didn't give it to the man expecting favors from the pigeons. At first, I didn't even believe they were smart enough to do anything for a person, and thought the man had some sort of harmless illness. For a moment, I wasn't sure what I believed, even if they were helping me out in some way because I bought their services. They were birds. What else could they even do? In the back of my mind, I was counting down the days until my so-called pigeon contract ended. On the final night, I came home very late because of some final project crunch at work. My girlfriend also had been working nonstop to finish a big project. She was an artist who did massive paintings that sold at a local gallery. She would spend a few months creating new pieces and living off the pay from the last batch. We were both suddenly hurting for cash because the gallery ordered 3 more large pieces, and that meant she needed to pay for materials she hadn't budgeted for. Once they were finished, it would be worth it. "You're late," she commented, stretching and greeting me by the door. "I heard Matt was going out tonight. Did you go with him?" The apartment smelled of paint, even though she had all the windows open. She was covered with all sorts of colors and needed a shower. I bet that's just what she had been about to do before I walked in the door. No, I was at work. I wanted to finish some stuff so I could have tomorrow off. Faintly, I heard a podcast in the painting room. Since she worked for long hours, she needed something to listen to. But I didn't fully approve of her listening to so many true crime podcasts. She got pretty freaked out after so many hours of them. "You need to shower. So do I. Let's have some water," I offered with a smile. I really wanted to hug her, but didn't want to get paint on my work clothes. "Can you take a rain check? I'm sore from working today," she suggested. She expected me to be disappointed. I was a little, and I snapped my fingers as if I had just lost a bet. "Darn it. Okay, next time. And how did you hear Matt was going out tonight?" "His girlfriend told me, but if you're not with him, that means he's going out drinking alone," she said while crossing her arms. Matt liked to drink at a bar about a 10-minute walk from my place. For lack of a better way to put it, Matt had a drinking problem. Unless someone was with him to keep him in line, he always got in trouble while on a night out. I knew what was even going to be said before the words came out of her mouth. "Maybe you should see if he's at the bar and get him home," she suggested. I groaned and rolled my eyes. I was thinking of excuses when she raised paint-stained hands in a threat. I raised my own in defeat. "Fine. I wanted to buy something from the store either way. Let me get changed first. And you need to stop listening to those podcasts," I told her. I like Matt's girlfriend. He might get wasted and cheat on her, and she doesn't deserve that. Matt is dumb, but not dumb enough to cheat. Even if he tried, he's such a messy drunk no one would take him. You just think he's going to be nabbed by those smiley face killers, who aren't real, by the way, I said with arms crossed. She narrowed her eyes over just how easily I saw through her, and how I refused to believe a conspiracy she did. "If you keep that up, they'll get you next. They also target boyfriends who don't buy their loving girlfriends Cheetos," she said while backing up towards the bathroom. I guess she wanted Cheetos while I was out. I let her get into the shower as I left to get my friend into a cab back home before he caused any trouble. I should never second-guess my girlfriend. She was smarter than me because somehow she knew Matt needed help. I sent a few texts asking if he was at the bar. It wasn't a very popular one, so I could easily find him inside if he was there. I was a block away when I saw someone stumble out of the bar. 2 people followed behind him. My hand tightened over my phone, ready to dial the police if needed. I quickened my pace to try and catch up to the 3 of them. The pair closed the distance between the first man, and I heard my friend yell. They dragged him into a small alleyway as Matt drunkenly shouted for them to let him go. I turned the corner to see one man keeping a hand on Matt's jacket. "Do you always go around talking to other people's girls, huh? Do you really think she would give you the time of day? The larger man accused. I suddenly felt exhausted. Why couldn't Matt just behave? He made things worse by not understanding how much trouble he was in. I didn't think she was yours because she didn't look at you all night. He shrugged. They got closer, both ready to knock some sense into Matt. I spoke up, causing all three of them to look in my direction. I'm calling the cops if you give me a reason to, I said, not feeling as brave as I sounded. Is he a friend of yours? The taller man asked. Sadly, yeah. That was not the right answer. They both decided that I needed the same kind of punishment as Matt. Since I most likely was going to call the police either way, they figured they could get something out of being arrested. The taller one landed a hard punch on Matt's face. I pulled out my phone about to call the cops, but the second attacker moved too fast. He hit me so hard it knocked me off my feet. I've never been much of a fighter. I tended to take the easy way out, or avoided confrontations altogether. The night should have ended with both of us in the hospital, but it didn't. Wings flapped in the darkness as a sudden flock of birds came down. They flew in the face of my attacker, blinding him. He swatted at the birds as he yelled. Their feet and beaks tore at his exposed skin. By sheer luck, he knocked one out of the air and hard to the ground. I scooped it up before he stomped on the poor bird. I held it carefully in my arms as I watched in horror as more pigeons flocked to the small alleyway. Within seconds, what appeared to be 1,000 of the birds came down. They mauled the two men. The sounds of their wings flapping were nearly deafening. Specks of blood and fabric flew out from the mass of feathers as they tore at the humans in the middle of the swarm. I didn't see Matt for a moment. Suddenly he came bursting out of the mass, his face bleeding from the attack. Pigeons came down on him as they saw him as an enemy. The first man's body dropped to the ground. Through the flapping wings, I saw a mass of flesh and bone. My stomach twisted, and fear ran through my body when I realized the birds were eating them alive. And Matt was next. Wait, please, I cried out, expecting the birds to understand me. He curled in a ball on the ground as they pecked away. He begged me to do something, but there were far too many. He'll buy you croutons, I shouted, feeling a little bit stupid expecting such an offer would work. Somehow, it did. The birds let up long enough for him to get up. He made a run for it, and I caught up to him and grabbed his collar. We were going to uphold our deal. He rambled, scared and hurt, begging for us to just go home. I looked up to see hundreds of pigeons sitting on buildings looking down at us. I called a taxi to get us to the nearest open grocery store. No matter where we went, we were being watched. I still held the injured bird from the fight, unsure of what to do with it. It sat calmly in my arms as we went inside the store. We were an odd sight. One was beaten and bruised while the other held a pigeon. We gathered up bags of croutons, hoping it was enough. Matt meekly tried to make me pay for some of them. I told him he had to do it. The birds already liked me. I wasn't certain how we would feed all the pigeons, but that was answered when we left the store. The pigeon man waited for us, and he accepted the bags along with the injured bird. Can we go home now? Matt said while looking around. He fidgeted, seeing so many birds watching us from all directions. I swear their eyes were glowing, but it may just be the street lights reflecting off their pupils. Your friend is in the clear, but the birds don't like you. Matt, was it? You'll need to keep buying them food every month, so they won't punish you. The man said, almost sounding bored. Punish me for what? My friend demanded. You kicked one of them outside the bar tonight. I looked over at Matt, frowning in disappointment. The fact we got away tonight was a miracle. These birds had been nice enough to give him a second chance after he hurt one of them. It's just a bird, he protested. No, it's not. In case you haven't noticed, this city is theirs now. They're just nice enough to let us live in it. Unless you want to end up as the others tonight, you'll feed them. Those words chilled me down to the bone. Flapping came overhead. A few pigeons landed near us, their dark eyes watching our reactions. Finally, Matt smartened up and nodded, agreeing to the deal. The man told him how much he needed to buy each month and let us leave. I made sure Matt got home, and we swore not to speak about what happened that night. I think he was worried the police wouldn't believe pigeons killed people who were going to kick his butt. I got home late as my girlfriend rushed over, clearly worried. Only when I saw her I realized I'd forgotten the Cheetos. She didn't care about that. She wanted to know why I had a bruise on the side of my face. I made up a lie about two guys trying to make trouble, and we spent some time running around a few blocks trying to lose them before heading home. She believed that, and I finally was able to relax a little from such a weird night. 2 months had passed since then. I was aware of every pigeon staring down at me as I went to work. Sometimes they watched me through the office windows. A small feeling of fear hit my stomach every time I saw one of them. I should have expected Matt to not be able to last 2 months. He disappeared last week. My girlfriend is spending a lot of time with his girlfriend to comfort her. It kills me that I can't tell them the reason why he was gone. I haven't heard of any reports of the bodies of the 2 men showing up. After all, 2 pecked to death men on the street would be a big deal. I've walked by where it happened during the day. Aside from some stains on the ground, there were no signs of what happened. I met the pigeon man again, cash in hand. "Can I pay for my girlfriend?" I asked him. He smiled but didn't accept the money right away. They only attack people who wronged them. They'll do favors and look out for the people who buy them food. But I think someday soon, they'll fully take over this city. I have a feeling that day will be a bloodbath. The only ones who will make it out alive will be the people like yourself. So, do you have any family that lives in the city? Luckily, I didn't. I paid him and moved on silently, starting to plan when to move. It would be hard starting in a new place. My girlfriend has only sold work to a local gallery. I hoped she could do the same thing if we left here. I didn't know how much time we had left, but it feels as if more and more pigeons are appearing on busy streets. Do me a favor. Take care of your local pigeon man. He might be more of a help than you first realize. And whatever you do, don't mistreat pigeons, no matter how much you dislike them. I would not consider myself a stupid person in any sense of the word, but I, like every person, am prone to stupid moments. That's why I decided not to go to school, but instead try to start my own business, in which I would sell my own clothing brand that I was so sure was going to make me millions. It didn't last more than 4 months. Now I'm stuck in my crappy one-bedroom apartment with almost 1,000 t-shirts that I am too embarrassed to tell you what they actually say. With nothing else going on, I just started looking for any job I could. But no one seemed to like the gap in the resume, so I had no offers. None. Zero. Except for one. A weird sketch Indeed ad that simply said, "Driver." It provided no information besides that, which I honestly didn't think was possible for there to be so little on Indeed. But there it was. I assumed it was for a taxi driver or a delivery driver. I was more than confident I could do that. I'd been driving since I was 15, so how hard could it be? With really nothing to lose, I figured at the worst they would try to rob me. Unless they wanted my clothes, they weren't getting much. When they did ask if I wanted the job, I just took it. Then I was told to meet the guy on the edge of town tonight. I asked what if I was busy, and he just responded, "Then no job." Well, I guess I had no other choice. I don't know what I expected, but it definitely wasn't one dude standing next to a van. Great, I thought. I'm gonna get robbed, murdered, or kidnapped. You Colton? Said the shaggy looking man with scruffy looking brown hair and beard. He reeked of weed. Yep, that's me, I thought. Just get it over with, man. You're gonna be driving this van down that road. He pointed off to the left. Okay, where am I driving it to? You'll know when you see it. Okay, well, you didn't really explain much about the job. I mean, I don't even know what the pay is. It ain't much, but I figure if you responded that you must really need money. I mean, you came out here in the middle of the night to meet a stranger with no prior information. He was right. Well, you haven't told me much. Am I delivering drugs? Why in the hell would I post a drug running job on Indeed? That's fair. You ask one more question, I'm revoking the offer. You either take these keys and get in the van or get out of my face. Remember how I said I'm prone to stupid decisions? This was one of them. I took the keys and got in the van. God, it smelt bad trying to grab the crank to roll down the window, but it didn't work. Oh, this is fun, I said. Already regretting my choices, I checked what else was wrong with the van. The AC didn't work, but the heater did. Oh, cool. I needed that in the middle of the summer. The windshield wipers worked, but no fluid. The back seat had been torn out, and there was a gross-looking mattress in their place, as well as a duffel bag. I opened to check its contents, fully expecting the drugs to be in it. But instead, it had a couple of pairs of clothes weirdly in my size, some bottled water and snack bars, as well as a flare gun and a med kit. I went back to checking the van. You know, what did work. The radio, except it was stuck on one channel that only played Christian music. No offense to anyone who follows that religion and all, but I was not listening to that. I shut off the radio and put music on my phone. I looked over at the man, but he was gone. Was I really about to do this? I told myself. I guess I was, 'cause I put the van into drive. I never got used to the feeling of driving at night, especially on country roads. As soon as you leave the city limits, you become suddenly aware of how dark nighttime is. The further you drive, the more and more the anxiety sets in. This was one road with no lines to keep you on one side, so I drove in the middle of the road until I saw someone coming on the left. Another fun thing about the road was just how bad it needed to be redone. It felt like I had to dodge a pothole every 40 feet or so. After driving for what felt like forever, but turned out to only be 43 minutes, I came on my first building, a small gas station with one pump. Upon seeing it, I began wondering how I was going to fill up the van. I looked down to see the gas gauge was still on full, so that meant either this thing got pretty good gas mileage, or that the gas gauge was also broken. I felt like it was the second one. I pulled over in hopes that it sold air fresheners. The smell only seemed to get worse as I drove. I was more than willing to spend what little money I had left on one. The place was extremely worn down. It only had one pump and no diesel nozzle. There were water stains running down the building, and a small breeze kept shaking a piece of the sheet metal roof. It clanked against it, and for a few short seconds I stood there listening. This was enough to annoy me, and I felt bad for any workers. I pulled the door open, but it got stuck against the concrete, and I heard someone from inside yell, "You're gonna have to shimmy through." I feel like that had to break some sort of law or safety violation. I slowly made my way through the gap. My jacket got stuck about halfway through, in which I then had to pull it off from the door, in the process ripping a small hole in the side. I looked over at the worker. He had his face buried in a book, and it seemed like he was trying to ignore me. "You sell air fresheners?" "Auto section's at the back of the store next to the medicine section." I took that as a yes. The air fresheners were $7 for one. Talk about overpricing. I knew I only had like $12 left in my account. My credit cards were maxed out, and I drained my savings, so I knew I had nothing to fall back on. I checked my bank account to make sure I had the money I thought I had. To my surprise, I had more. Finally, something good. I had a whole $23 that I was about to completely blow at this random gas station. Still unsure if I was even getting paid for this. Why was I still driving? I mean, really, there was no job security here. I still don't even know what I'm delivering or if I am delivering something. Was I this desperate? Just then, like he was reading my mind, I looked down to see a text from Charlie. Wait, who was Charlie? Don't worry, kid, you're getting paid. You already have been. I went into my deposits to see that $9 had been put into my account a couple of minutes before I came to the gas station. The memo just said from Charlie. So Charlie was the man who gave me the van. I'd put that part together. I had so many questions. Where did I get this number? I mean, I don't remember exchanging numbers. I don't remember learning his name or making a contact with him. I know I didn't give him any banking info. My mind was racing. I tried texting him back, but it just said undelivered. You know what? I was still alive and getting paid, so I'm not asking any more questions. I picked up the air freshener and went to the counter. On the counter, I saw some charges, so I picked up one that goes into the lighter port. I at least wanted my phone if I was going to be driving for God knows how long. How much for these? The man picked up the items and scanned them. $13.78. I fished in my pocket for my wallet and put my card in the reader. So you're actually real, the man behind the counter said. What is that supposed to mean? Don't worry about it, he said, shoving his face back in the book. What a weird interaction, I thought to myself on my way out. I got in the van and put up my new air fresheners. The man slapped the side of the van, startling me in the process. I opened the door to yell at him, but he cut me off. Unless you pull into somewhere with people, stay in your car. He walked away before elaborating. I was half tempted to follow him, but I decided against it. I was back on the road. I decided to put on a YouTube video as I was getting sick of my music. It was a video of someone explaining the Waco siege, which I had already listened to a couple of times. But I liked the YouTuber, and he was slow between uploads. It got to the point where they accidentally lit the compound on fire. Just then a large creature jumped out from the darkness, bailing in front of the van. I tried to swerve as to not hit it, but I wasn't quick enough. The van collided with the creature, smacking it with the front before it proceeded to roll over the top. I slammed on my brakes, stopping to catch my breath. My heart was pounding in my chest. I took a second breath and got out to inspect the damages on both the van and whatever I hit. The van was fine, not even a scratch on it. What a tank. The animal was not fine. It was a deer. One of its antlers broke off in the impact, and its face did not seem to enjoy the asphalt. There was a small trail of blood where it skidded down the road. One of its legs was broken and was sticking in the wrong direction. Oh, that thing is dead. I ate my words as I heard them huff. Now I felt like it was my obligation to put it out of its misery. I found a big enough rock on the side of the road to crush its head. Shuffling over with the heavy thing, I raised it as far as I could and dropped it. The thing came down with a splat. Blood shot up from it and splattered on my face. Well, I said, wiping the blood off my face onto my jacket. I had done my civil duty. At least that's what I thought before the deer started squirming. I had made it worse. It kicked and jumped, trying to get its head out from underneath the rock. I sat dumbfounded, trying to figure out if I should smash it with another rock or help it get the rock off. But just then it stopped. I was thankful as it finally died. I ate my words again. The thing planted its 3 working legs. As it did, the 4th leg began to crack back into place. The bones crunched multiple times, and suddenly the leg was planted with the other 3. What the... The deer lifted its head and the rock easily fell out of its place. It sat up and stared at me. Half of its face was scrapped from the asphalt. The other half flattened inward. There was no blood and revealed bone. Its lower mouth hung halfway off, and its brain was revealed to the fresh air. In no world should it have been alive. It looked mad in a way animals should not be able to show. The deer started its charge for me, its broken jaw swaying as it did. I turned around to make my run back toward the van, but the deer was much faster than me. I felt its remaining antler tear into my clothes and then into my back, knocking me to the ground and standing in front of me now ready to make its second charge. I was able to roll out of the way this time. I pushed myself forward into the driver's seat and pressed the gas pedal as hard as I could, but since it was still in park, it didn't move. The deer rammed it into the side, shaking the whole van. I put it into drive and peeled out of there. My adrenaline finally started to wear off, and I was very aware of my injuries. Not only my back, but my knee and hands, which I scraped during my fall. Once I felt I was far enough down the road, I pulled over. Using one of the van's side mirrors, I did my best to examine my injuries. The 2 scratches on my lower back seemed to not be serious, but the puncture wound in my shoulder was bleeding really bad. I called 911 to get an ambulance, but the call wouldn't go through. It just kept failing. I knew I was going to have to drive myself to a hospital, and since I didn't want to die of blood loss, I saw one option. This was my first time doing stitches, so my solution was, well, I ended up on a WikiHow link, which, as I'm typing this, I realized was another stupid moment. I lacked most of the tools they use, so I had to just follow it as best I could. I took a needle and thread from the med kit and went at it. After poking the needle in my skin for the first time, I realized how painful it was. I grabbed my shirt and rolled it up so I had something to bite onto, and went through several painstaking minutes of stitching. By the end of it, all I wanted was to get blackout drunk. I applied some of the first aid cream, which was 4 minor cuts and scrapes and scratches over my wound. Probably wouldn't help much, but better than nothing. Then slapping a gauze and some medical tape on it. If you are wondering how I stitched the back of my shoulder in the dark, side mirror and dome light from the van. I won't elaborate further. I decided my temporary sketchy job wasn't worth my life and started the 2-hour drive back towards town. I made my way around a bend in the road and I was back in the same place I just stitched myself in. What the hell? I thought it was the same place. I flipped the van around and drove again in the opposite direction, turned around again in the same place. I tried again and again and again, but I kept ending up in the exact same place. Even getting out a couple times to find my blood on the road. I once again received a text. It was from Charlie. Keep driving. I texted him back asking who the hell he was and what kind of mind trick he was playing, but every text I sent didn't go through. I tried calling 911 again. I tried texting. I tried calling a friend, my old coworker, and my dad. No call or text would go through. I tried Insta, I tried Snapchat and Facebook, any app that would allow me to send a text. I tried even leaving comments on YouTube videos. I could use these apps, but I in no way could interact with others. Once again, I received another message from Charlie. Keep driving. I accepted my defeat. I couldn't drive back toward town, and I couldn't contact anyone for help. This felt like the only option. So I got back in the van and started back on the road. I don't know what Charlie was, but he somehow was keeping me on this road, and he wasn't allowing me to talk to anyone I knew. But in a cruel twist of fate, I would later find out that I have one way to contact the outside world. Reddit. I can post as freely as I want on Reddit. I know that sounds stupid as hell, but it doesn't matter anyway. There is no way for anyone to even come help me, and I'm not revealing how to get to me. I kept driving. I'd been on the road for almost 8 hours. When I saw the diner, I pulled over and made my way inside. An older woman greeted me, sitting me down in a booth and handing me a menu. I'll be back to take your order. There was one other customer in the place. He looked over at me before standing up from his table and making his way towards me. "Are you real or one of them?" he asked, sitting down across from me. "One of them?" "One of the things from the road." "I don't know what that means." "I can tell you're not one of them. He got you too, didn't he? That Charlie." "You know him? Homeless looking dude? Had you come to the edge of town and the promise of riches untold? All you had to do was drive?" I didn't want to admit he tricked me with a lot less than untold riches. "Yeah, something like that." "There's no way back. No way to call for help. How long have you been driving?" 8 hours, I think." "You're pretty new still." "Wait, shh, she's coming." The waitress came back to the table. "You two ready to order?" She didn't seem to care that there was someone else at the table with me now. "Cheeseburger's fine," the man said. "I'll do the same." She walked off. "Like I said, you are pretty new still. You wouldn't believe the stuff I've seen, man. Giant worms jumping over the roads, houses that stand up out of the ground to chase you, hitchhikers that disintegrate into frogs when you pick them up. You know that sounds insane, right? If it was unbelievable, you wouldn't be listening still. So I'm guessing you've seen something that you're still on the fence about." I looked down at the table and whispered, "Zombie deer." I still don't know if the deer was paranormal or just a freak of nature, but he was right. It was unexplainable at the very least. The waitress came back with our food. She stared upwards at the ceiling as if she was trying to avoid eye contact. She was listening in on us. Somehow I knew that. We both gobbled it up, and not a word was exchanged. It wasn't until we both left the building that he spoke up again. 9 weeks. "What?" "I've been on the road for 9 weeks. "Jesus, and you have no idea how to get off. So that means I'm stuck?" "Yeah, you're stuck. But I got an idea." "What's that?" "Let's go drive the road together. Safer in numbers, you know." "Hell no, man. I don't know if I even believe you for one. And if I did decide you were telling the truth, what's to say you're not something the road conjured up to trick me?" "Yeah, you bring up a good point. Look, man, since you're probably gonna die..." "What?" "Let me finish. Since you're probably gonna die, I wish you the best of luck." With that, he turned around, got in his car, and sped out of the parking lot. All while I sat there trying to figure out my next move. I knew something was wrong. I knew somehow I was stuck on the road, but I knew nothing else. If I was to believe that man, I was gonna see some weird stuff. I believed him. I don't know why, but I did. I got back in the van and I kept driving. The next fun thing I learned about the road is that the sun never comes up. In my 11 days of driving, I haven't seen the sun once. Unless I was somehow sleeping at the perfect time to miss all the sunlight, but that doesn't seem right. I never was a morning person, and I never was a people person, but I was missing both of those. It makes you realize how much you took for granted. Showers and hot food. I didn't get to finish my thought before the van was sent off the side of the road, causing it and me to tumble my head smack on the steering wheel, and I blacked out for a second. The van lay on its driver's side. I was hanging slightly above the window. I reached over to unbuckle myself, falling directly into the window. My whole body felt heavy. My poor stitched job showed. Blood trickled from my back and from a newly formed scratch on my forehead. I didn't have any time to worry about that. Whatever knocked the van off the road got closer now. I could hear its heavy steps moving through a nearby brush. I tried to push myself up, but new injuries began to present themselves. My ribs ached and I couldn't put any weight on my legs. I pulled myself using the armrest on the driver's side. I stood using my good leg to hold myself up, reaching for the passenger side door. But the thing dented the door inward. No matter how hard I tried, it wasn't opening. All while it got closer. I tried the window, but of course it wouldn't roll down. An arm crashed through the front window, piercing the seat behind me. I had to duck down, forcing myself between the front seats and to the back of the van. Pain shot through my body as I crawled through. The mattress had been knocked out of its place, forcing me to crawl under it. The monster was away from the window and I could hear it scratching the car to my right. I lay in place, hoping it didn't know where I was. Its arm pierced through the side just above me. I crawled quicker towards the back window. Relief washed over me upon seeing the glass was already broken. I made my way through it, and I finally saw outside the van. Forcing myself up through the gap, feeling how ruined my leg was, I placed all my weight on my other leg, trying to move as fast as I could. I turned to see the monster's arm was still stuck inside the van. It tried harder and harder to pull its arm out. I used my opportunity to put as much distance as I could between us. The monster yanked, pulling its arm from the van before screeching into the air. It stared at me with dark black eyes and pale skin. It walked on 2 legs and had 4 arms. One of the arms lay flat on moving, the same one it pulled from the van. It clasped its incredibly sharp teeth together before running towards me. It was so much faster, there was no way I could move quickly enough. It ran with its working arm in the air as it tried to come for me. It was bloated, wearing pants and a jacket. It was human enough. I was on the road before my good leg gave out. I collapsed upon it. I turned my head to see it standing feet from me, still screaming, but it stopped right in front of me, staring at the sky. For the first time since I started on the road, the sun was rising. The monster screeched one more time before turning around and running from the road into some brush. Soon it was far from my sight. I wasn't gonna wait around for it to come finish the job. I hobbled down the road for a mile or so, which in my current condition took much longer than it should have. From behind I heard the noise of what sounded like a metal clacking together. When it got closer, I was able to figure out it was a car. It came right towards me and I prepared myself for whatever else the road was gonna throw at me. The vehicle pulled over, and a familiar face stepped out, the same man from the diner. "You're alive," he yelled at me. I said nothing back, just hobbled over to the car, opened the passenger door, and got in. He nodded and got into the driver's seat. We drove for 10 minutes before either of us said a word. "I saw your van and just assumed whatever did that got you." "You left the diner before me." "Yeah, I stopped a little down the road and waited for you to pass. I've been following you since." Eventually, we came to a clearing just a bit further down the road and took a moment to properly assess my injuries. He told me my stitch job was utter crap and stitched it up properly. He then took to my leg, telling me it wasn't that bad, and made me a makeshift cast out of some of the foam and cardboard. He placed a bandage over my forehead, and as for my ribs, there wasn't anything he could do. We took the time to finally introduce ourselves. This was Ted Villock, a 33-year-old, self-proclaimed doomsday prepper. The knowledge he gained in preparation for the end times came in handy, but he was kinda, in the nicest way possible, an insane conspiracy theorist who thought our whole journey on the road was manufactured by aliens to test the limits of human capability. I didn't care about that. He could ramble about it all day. I was just happy to be around someone. For now, that's all I got. I'm stuck on this road and no one's gonna come and help me. At least I have company. I welcome any theories about what's going on here. And I'll let you know if anything else interesting happens. Something strange is happening at the small church near my house. I've stumbled upon some horrific things there, and I'm not sure what to do. I live in the suburbs, in a quiet area with 15 houses scattered around. Going into the city takes 40 minutes by car. I don't know any of my neighbors. I only know John, who lives closest to me. I work as a data engineer for an insurance company, but I won't bore you with the details. What matters is that it takes me 2 hours to get to work, so my days are long. I wake up at 5 a.m. and don't get home until 8 p.m. I usually don't do anything once I get home because I am too exhausted. Only on the weekends do I have some time for myself, which I use to work on my photography skills. Last Wednesday, I went to a restaurant with my colleagues for a team outing after work. I still had to work a 9 to 5 that day, so I felt drained before it even started. Socializing is already tough for me as an introvert, and keeping up with the group was exhausting. I mostly stuck to polite conversation, as I'm not sure what kind of conversations I'm supposed to have with colleagues that aren't work-related. We stayed at the restaurant until 9 p.m., and since it was in the opposite direction of my house, I had a 2.5 hour drive ahead of me to get home. As I was driving back, I hit another delay. A crash on the highway that added another 30 minutes. I was frustrated, knowing I'd barely have any time to rest before the next workday. It was nearly 11 p.m. when I finally got onto the quiet suburban roads near my house. It was pitch black, and even with my headlights on, I had to be extra careful because wildlife could jump out at any moment. It once happened to me that a deer jumped in front of my car and just stood there. I barely managed to stop in time, but ever since then, I've been extra careful. When I was about 10 minutes from home, I passed by the small church. It always seemed a bit eerie to me. It's never really used except for the occasional funeral. The building seems to be on the older side, so I assume it's kept around for its historical value. The church looked particularly sinister that night. Despite my tiredness, I saw an opportunity to take a good picture from my photography portfolio. I stopped the car and took a few photos, then went back inside to review them. In one of the photos, I noticed something. After adding some filters to the photo to enhance the quality, I saw a bike and a person sitting on a bench near the church. It wasn't visible in the other pictures, probably because of the angle and the darkness. It was strange for someone to be at the church that late, so I looked back at the bench from my car, but I could not see the person sitting there. Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to check it out. I got out of the car and walked towards the church. The bike was still there, but there was no sign of the person. Then I heard a noise coming from inside the church. Why would someone be inside at this hour? Looking back, my tiredness had clouded my judgment as I decided to investigate. I walked up to one of the windows and peered inside. Instead of seeing the main hall, I saw a small side room. I couldn't get a view of the main area, so I quietly made my way to the front door and opened it. As soon as I did, I could hear chanting. I moved further in, hoping to hear what they were saying. I found myself in a small hallway that led to the room I had seen earlier, and another door that opened to the main hall. The chanting was coming from there. I peeked inside, and what I saw made my stomach turn. 6 people were standing in a circle chanting in front of the altar. I recognized one of them as my neighbor, John. He's always been a down-to-earth guy. I couldn't find a reasonable explanation for why I found him in a situation like this. In the middle of the circle was a young girl tied up with a piece of cloth in her mouth, presumably to stop her from screaming. The chanting continued, and that's when a 7th person entered the room holding a staff. He must have been their leader because the others immediately turned toward him as he approached the altar. "Tonight we will live. The world is against our practices. Therefore we shall not engage, but sacrifices must be made. Not for us, but for him. Fearless leader, accept our offering. Bless us with your guidance, your wisdom, and riches." I realized I had walked into some kind of cult ritual. The group resumed chanting as the leader approached the girl. After they finished, each of them cut their arm with a knife, letting the blood drip onto her. "Please accept our offering and bless us with your guidance, wisdom, and riches." Before I could fully grasp what was happening, the leader plunged the knife into the girl's stomach. Without thinking, I screamed, "No!" which I instantly regretted. Their heads turned toward me. One of them started running toward me, and I bolted out of there as fast as I could. I made it to my car, locked the doors, and started the engine as the man tried to open the door. He stared at me with a big, twisted smile as I sped away. I called the police as soon as I got home, explaining what I had witnessed, but they believed I was prank calling them. I didn't sleep at all that night. The man who chased me saw my face. John knows who I am. They'll find me. This morning I found a letter in front of my door. You are invited to celebrate the church's 350-year anniversary. Please help me.